Captain Maya Johnson had always been proud of her work. She was the first black female captain in her precinct, a role she had earned through hard work, dedication, and a strong sense of justice. Her career had not been easy. She had faced many challenges, but she had never let them stop her from doing what was right. Every day, she walked into the precinct with her head held high, knowing that her job was to protect the people in her community and ensure that justice was served. It was just another regular morning for Maya as she arrived at the police station. The sun was barely up, and the streets were quiet. She walked through the doors of the precinct, greeting her colleagues with a warm smile. Most of them respected her and admired her for the way she handled every situation with calm professionalism. But that morning, something felt different. There was a new officer in the precinct. Officer Kyle Mason had just transferred in, and Maya could sense the tension in the air as soon as she saw him. He was young, in his late 20s, with a confident swagger in his step. His uniform was crisp, and he had the kind of arrogance that didn't sit well with many of the other officers. Maya noticed how he looked at her a little too long, with eyes that didn't seem to have much respect for her. At first, she shrugged it off. She had dealt with people like him before, those who thought they could judge her by the color of her skin instead of her skills. She didn't let such people get to her. But as the day went on, Maya began to feel uneasy around Officer Mason. His attitude was becoming more noticeable. He made little comments here and there, things that were disrespectful, but she ignored them. Then, during a routine investigation, something happened that Maya could not ignore. Officer Mason and Maya were called to a scene involving a theft at a local store. When they arrived, they went over the facts together. The shopkeeper had reported some missing items, but there was no clear suspect. They went over the security footage, looking for any clues. As they stood there, reviewing the footage, Maya noticed something odd. The shopkeeper seemed to be pointing fingers at a few possible suspects, none of whom looked like they could have been involved in the theft. Maya immediately questioned the shopkeeper about the accusations, sensing something was off. But Officer Mason wasn't so patient. Without even thinking, he stepped forward, and in front of everyone, accused Maya of being part of the theft. He said that the way the footage was presented, it looked like she was involved in some way. Maya stood there, shocked, unable to believe what she was hearing. "Are you serious?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "You're accusing me of stealing." Mason didn't back down. He insisted that he was just doing his job, and that the evidence pointed to her. Maya's heart sank as she realized what was happening. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. Mason was targeting her, and he was doing it because of her position as a black woman in a position of power. The other officers in the room stood in silence, unsure of what to do. Maya could feel the weight of the moment. She had worked so hard to earn her place, and now, in front of her fellow officers, she was being humiliated by a racist cop. The sting of his words cut deeper than she could explain, but she knew she had to stay calm. The moment was a test, one that Maya knew would define the course of her career and the rest of her life. Little did she know, this was just the beginning of a battle that would change everything. Maya stood frozen for a moment, staring at Officer Mason. The accusation he had made felt like a punch to the gut. She had worked her entire career to earn the trust of her colleagues, and now here he was, publicly accusing her of a crime she hadn't committed. "I'm telling you, this is ridiculous," Maya said, trying to keep her voice steady, but her hands were trembling. She had to remain calm. She couldn't let Mason see how deeply hurt she was by his words. Mason didn't seem to care about her reaction. He stood there, arms crossed, a smug look on his face as he pointed at her like she was already guilty. "I'm just saying, Captain," he said, "there's something off about all of this. The way you're acting, it doesn't add up." The room fell silent. Maya's colleagues shifted awkwardly, clearly uncomfortable, but no one spoke up to defend her. Some looked away, others glanced at their feet. Maya could feel their eyes on her, but not one of them came to her side. She was on her own. I've been a police officer for over 15 years, Maya said firmly, trying to stay composed. And I'd never been involved in any kind of crime, especially not something as low as stealing. Mason, however, didn't back down. You're the one in charge here. I'm just saying. People like you sometimes think they can get away with things, but not under my watch. The words hung in the air like a weight. Maya's anger was building inside her, but she knew that reacting too harshly wouldn't help her cause. She needed to stay professional, even if he wasn't. I'm not going to stand here and let you talk to me like this, Maya said, her voice cold. If you want to accuse me, you better have some proof to back it up. Otherwise, you're just making yourself look foolish. But Mason didn't care about proof. He had already made up his mind. He turned to the others in the room. I'm calling it in, he said. We'll see what the higher-ups think about this. Maya's stomach twisted as she realized what was about to happen. He wasn't just accusing her, he was about to take it further. In a matter of minutes, she could be arrested, her career shattered, and her entire reputation destroyed by a lie. And that's exactly what happened. Officer Mason called for backup, and soon a few other officers arrived. They took Maya into custody right there in the station. She couldn't believe it. All the years she had worked to earn her position, all the lives she had helped, all the battles she had fought in her career, it all seemed to be slipping away in an instant. As she was led to the holding cell, Maya's mind raced. How could this be happening? Why was Mason doing this? She knew there were people in the department who didn't like the idea of a black woman being in charge, but this was different. This felt personal. I don't know what you think you're doing, Mason, Maya said as she walked past him, but you'll regret this. He just smirked, clearly enjoying the moment. We'll see about that, Captain. Maya couldn't let herself get distracted by Mason's childish behavior. She needed to focus. She knew she wasn't guilty, and she knew that eventually the truth would come out. But right now, she had to keep her head down and wait for the right moment. The fight was just beginning, and she wasn't about to let him win. As Maya sat alone in the holding cell, the weight of what had just happened settled heavily on her shoulders. Her hands were cold, and her mind raced with thoughts of what to do next. It was hard to believe that just hours ago, she had been standing in front of her team, respected and confident. Now she was locked in a small room, her career hanging by a thread. But Maya was no stranger to challenges. Throughout her life, she had faced discrimination and doubt, and time and again, she had overcome them. This was no different. She would not let this racist cop define her. She would fight. The walls of the holding cell seemed to close in on her as she sat in silence, but she refused to let fear take control. Instead, she took a deep breath, steadying herself. She had to stay calm, think clearly, and find a way to clear her name. She knew this battle wasn't just about her reputation. It was about standing up for what was right. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, breaking the silence. It was a text from Officer Jessica Miller, one of her trusted colleagues who had always stood by her. The message was simple. I'm working on something. Hang tight, Maya. We won't let this go. Maya felt a wave of relief wash over her. Jessica was loyal, and she wasn't going to let Mason's lies stand without a fight. She knew that Jessica would do whatever it took to find the truth and expose Mason for what he had done. But Maya couldn't wait around. She had always been someone who took action, and this was no different. Sitting idly wasn't an option. She stood up and paced the small cell, her mind working through everything that had happened. She knew Mason had no real evidence. He was trying to manipulate the situation to make her look guilty, and he was relying on the fact that she was a black woman in a position of power. He thought people would believe him over her, but Maya wasn't going to let that happen. She had worked hard to get where she was, and she wouldn't let him take that away from her. Maya's thoughts were interrupted as the door to the holding cell opened. Officer Miller stepped inside, her face serious but determined. She handed Maya a set of clothes, and Maya slipped into them quickly. I've got something, Jessica said, her voice low. We're looking into Mason's past. It's not pretty, Maya. He's got a record. multiple complaints from other officers about his behavior. We'll use that against him. Maya nodded. She felt a flicker of hope. Thank you, Jessica. We need to move quickly before he gets away with this. Jessica's eyes burned with determination. We'll make sure he doesn't. We've got your back. With Jessica's support, Maya began to feel like she was no longer alone in this fight. It wasn't just about clearing her name anymore. It was about standing up for what was right and making sure that no one, especially not someone like Mason, could get away with this kind of behavior. They began to make their plans. Maya's team would gather evidence, review security footage, and interview the other officers who had witnessed Mason's actions. Meanwhile, Maya would focus on making sure the department knew the truth. She wouldn't let Mason's lies be the end of her career. She had too much to lose, and she was ready to fight for everything she had worked for. Her resolve grew stronger with each passing moment. This wasn't just about winning a battle. It was about sending a message. No one could undermine her or anyone else because of their race or gender. Maya was determined to make sure of that. Maya stood at her desk, reading through the latest reports while her mind replayed the events of the past few days. The feeling of being betrayed by Officer Mason still stung, but she was determined to move forward. The support from Jessica and the rest of the team had given her a renewed sense of strength. They were all working together, ready to expose the truth. It wasn't long before Maya started hearing whispers around the precinct. Some officers had been quietly speaking out, expressing their concerns about Mason's behavior. Maya was grateful that not everyone was blind to his actions. Still, she knew that it would take more than just word of mouth to bring him down. It was time to dig deeper. Her team had already started gathering information on Mason. As they looked through his history, it became clear that this wasn't the first time he had caused trouble. Maya learned that there were several complaints against Mason from officers in other precincts he had worked at. Most of them were about his insubordination and his attitude toward colleagues, especially those of different backgrounds. Maya was shocked to discover that Mason had a pattern of disrespect toward minority officers. It wasn't just about one isolated incident. It was clear that he had been undermining authority and acting out for quite some time. In one of the complaints, another officer had written, "Mason refuses to follow orders and often mocks those in higher positions, especially people of color." It was painful to realize that Mason had likely been hiding behind his badge, using it as a shield to protect his own prejudices. Maya had heard stories about racist behavior within the force, but to see it laid out so clearly was a wake-up call. "We've got to take this to the top," Maya said, sitting down with Jessica. "This isn't just about me. He's been doing this for years, and it's time for it to stop." Jessica nodded. "I agree. We need to make sure that his actions don't go unnoticed. We'll take these complaints to Internal Affairs, and they'll have no choice but to investigate." It was a bold move, but Maya knew it was the right one. She had already been through so much, and now it was time to fight for justice, not only for herself, but for every officer who had been mistreated by Mason. Maya wasn't afraid of what would come next. She had faced challenges before, and this time, she wasn't going to back down. It wasn't just about clearing her name. It was about ensuring that no officer, no matter their background, would ever have to face the same kind of treatment again. The next morning, Maya and Jessica marched into Internal Affairs with the evidence they had gathered. The room was filled with stern-faced officers, but Maya stood tall. As she placed the file on the table, she felt a surge of confidence. She was finally taking action to stop Mason's reign of disrespect. As she walked out of the office, Maya couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. She had taken the first step toward holding Mason accountable, but she knew this was just the beginning. Mason was about to face the consequences of his actions, and Maya was determined to make sure that justice was served. The days that followed were filled with tension. Maya knew that taking the evidence to Internal Affairs was just the beginning of a long journey. But despite the challenges ahead, she felt a renewed sense of hope. With each step, it became clearer that the truth was on her side. After the meeting with Internal Affairs, things began to move quickly. Maya's case was officially opened, and investigators started looking into Officer Mason's history. They interviewed colleagues, examined the complaints against him, and reviewed the evidence that Maya and her team had gathered. It was a thorough process, but Maya was confident that the truth would come out. However, Mason wasn't going to make it easy. He had a lot of influence, and he wasn't about to lose his position without a fight. Maya heard rumors that Mason was working behind the scenes, trying to manipulate the situation. He was contacting other officers, trying to get them to back him up. But Maya wasn't concerned about his threats. She had a strong team behind her, and she knew the truth would prevail. The legal process was slow, and there were moments when it felt like nothing was changing. Maya spent long hours at the station, dealing with the mounting stress of the case, but she refused to give up. She kept her focus, pushing forward, knowing that her integrity and her years of hard work would be enough to overcome any obstacle. Then one morning, Maya received an unexpected call. It was from the department's legal team, and they had some important news. After reviewing everything, they decided to file formal charges against Officer Mason. The charges were for misconduct, including falsifying reports, insubordination, and racial discrimination. The weight of the charges was enough to shake Mason's confidence. Maya couldn't believe it. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to smile. This was the breakthrough she had been waiting for. The department had finally taken a stand against Mason's behavior, and now it was time for him to face the consequences. But Maya knew that Mason would fight the charges with everything he had. He would hire a lawyer, try to twist the facts, and make it look like he was the victim. She had seen it before. People like Mason rarely admitted to their wrongdoings. But this time, Maya wasn't going to let him get away with it. In the days that followed, Maya prepared for the battle ahead. She worked closely with her legal team, helping them gather the final pieces of evidence. She knew that it wouldn't be easy to bring someone like Mason down, but she was ready. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about justice for all the officers he had mistreated, all the colleagues he had undermined. Maya stood at her desk one evening, staring at the file in front of her. She had come so far, but the hardest part was still to come. The court hearings, the cross-examinations, the long hours of testimony. It was all ahead of her. But Maya was no stranger to hard work. She had faced challenges before, and each time, she had come out stronger. As she closed the file and looked around the station, Maya couldn't help but feel proud of how far she had come. She had faced humiliation, but she had never let it break her. Now, with the legal battle beginning, she was ready to finish what she had started. Maya would fight until the end, no matter what it took. The courtroom was packed. Maya sat at the front with her legal team, the weight of the moment pressing down on her shoulders. The trial had finally begun, and she knew this was the turning point. The fight for her career, her reputation, and the truth was now in full swing. Across the room, Officer Mason sat with his lawyer, a smug expression on his face. He was still holding on to the belief that he could win this. After all, he had manipulated so many people before. But Maya wasn't going to let him win this time. She could feel the support of her colleagues, her friends, and her team behind her, all rooting for the truth to prevail. The trial started with the prosecution laying out the charges against Mason. They spoke of his repeated insubordination, his history of complaints from other officers, and his mistreatment of colleagues, especially those from minority backgrounds. The evidence was overwhelming, and Maya's heart swelled with hope. She knew that Mason had been hiding behind his badge for too long, but now the truth was coming to light. As the prosecution called witness after witness, Maya couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. Each person who testified confirmed what she had known all along, that Mason had a pattern of bullying and disrespect, and his actions went beyond one isolated incident. The defense tried to poke holes in the testimonies, but it was clear to everyone in the room that Mason's actions had been both unjust and harmful. When it was finally Maya's turn to take the stand, she stood up with determination. She had been preparing for this moment for weeks, but now, standing in front of the jury, She knew that her words could make all the difference. "I didn't want this to happen," Maya began, her voice steady. "I've spent my entire career working to build trust, not only with the people I serve, but with my fellow officers. I never thought I would be in this position, but I'm here today because I believe in the truth, and I believe that every officer, no matter their race or background, deserves to be treated with respect." She paused, looking at the jury, her eyes meeting theirs. "Officer Mason attacked me because he believed he could. He thought I wouldn't fight back. But I am fighting, not just for myself, but for every person who's been disrespected by him, every officer who's felt threatened or belittled by him. This isn't just about one accusation. It's about holding someone accountable for their actions." Maya's words hung in the air, and for the first time during the trial, Mason's confident posture faltered. She could see it in his eyes, a flicker of doubt. The evidence was stacking up against him, and there was nowhere for him to hide. When she finished her testimony, Maya sat back down, her heart pounding. She had said what needed to be said, and now the jury had to decide. It was no longer about accusations or lies. It was about the truth, and Maya was certain that it would win. The rest of the trial moved quickly. The defense tried to make Mason look like the victim, but the evidence and Maya's testimony had already turned the tide. There was no denying that Mason had acted in a way that was both harmful and unjust. As the closing arguments began, Maya felt a sense of calm wash over her. The turning point had come, and there was no going back. The truth was clear, and it was only a matter of time before justice was served. The final moments of the trial were closing in. Maya sat in the courtroom, her heart pounding as the jury deliberated. She had spoken her truth, and the evidence was clear. Now it was out of her hands. All she could do was wait. Mason, on the other hand, was growing more anxious by the minute. His confident facade had crumbled, and now he sat with his lawyer, fidgeting nervously. The reality of his situation was sinking in. His lies were being exposed, and his future in law enforcement was on the line. The jury deliberated for hours, but finally, the courtroom doors opened, and the foreman entered. The room fell silent. Everyone held their breath as the foreman stood and spoke the words they had all been waiting for. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Officer Kyle Mason, guilty of misconduct, racial discrimination, and falsifying reports." Maya felt a wave of relief rush over her. The weight she had carried for so long, the uncertainty and stress, suddenly lifted. Justice had been served. Mason had been held accountable for his actions. It was over. Mason's face turned pale as the verdict was read. His arrogance, his sense of invincibility, all vanished in an instant. He had tried to manipulate the situation, thinking he could get away with his behavior. But now, the truth had won. The judge spoke, his voice steady. "Officer Mason, you are hereby sentenced to disciplinary action, including suspension, demotion, and a permanent ban from law enforcement." The courtroom erupted in murmurs, but Maya stayed calm. She had fought for this moment, and now it was here. Mason's career was over, and he would have to live with the consequences of his actions. As the gavel came down, Maya allowed herself a small smile. This was a victory not just for her, but for every person who had ever been wronged by someone in power. This was proof that no one was above the law, no matter their rank or position. Outside the courtroom, Maya was met with congratulations from her colleagues. Jessica gave her a hug, and other officers, some of whom had been silent during the trial, came forward to offer their support. Maya had known all along that she wasn't alone, but seeing the outpouring of support reminded her of how far she had come. Mason, now a fallen officer, was escorted out of the courthouse by his lawyer. He had no more power, no more protection. His career in law enforcement was over, and the damage he had caused would follow him for the rest of his life. For Maya, this was just the beginning of a new chapter. She had been tested in ways she never imagined, but she had come out stronger. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she knew she had the strength to face anything that came her way. As she left the courthouse, Maya looked up at the sky. She had fought for justice, and she had won. It was a reminder that no matter how hard the journey, the truth would always prevail. The days following the trial were filled with a sense of relief, but also a quiet anticipation. Maya had proven herself, not just in the courtroom, but in the eyes of her colleagues and the people she served. But now, as she walked into the precinct, she knew that things were changing. Mason was gone. He had been permanently banned from law enforcement, and his name had been stripped from the records. The department had been shaken by his actions, but there was a newfound sense of accountability. Officers who had been hesitant before were now stepping forward, speaking up about the things they had witnessed, the things they had ignored. Maya walked down the hallway of the precinct, her steps confident. She had always been determined, but now she felt a deeper sense of purpose. The department needed to change, and she was going to be the one to help lead that change. When she entered her office, she found a small gathering of officers waiting for her. They stood up when she entered, and Maya smiled, feeling a sense of warmth that she hadn't experienced in a long time. These were the officers who had stood by her, the ones who had quietly supported her through the most difficult time of her career. Jessica, her closest ally, was the first to speak. Maya, we all know what you've done for this department. You've shown us what it means to stand up for what's right. And now, it's our turn to stand by you. Maya nodded, her heart swelling with gratitude. Thank you, Jessica. Thank you, all of you. We've been through a lot, but we're stronger because of it. This isn't just about me. This is about every officer who has ever felt silenced or ignored. It's time for things to change. The officers in the room exchanged looks, and Maya could see the change in their eyes. They were ready to move forward, to build a department where fairness and respect were at the core of everything they did. Later that day, Maya was called into a meeting with the chief of police. She walked into the room, feeling a mix of nerves and excitement. She had been through so much, but now it seemed like everything was falling into place. Maya, the chief said, looking at her with a respectful gaze, you've proven yourself to be a leader in this department. Your courage and integrity have inspired everyone here. We've decided to promote you to deputy chief. Maya's breath caught in her throat. She had worked so hard to get to this point, and now her efforts were being recognized in the most meaningful way. The chief continued, we need someone like you to help lead us into a new era, one where fairness and equality come first. You've earned this. Tears welled up in Maya's eyes as she accepted the promotion. It was the culmination of years of hard work, perseverance, and sacrifice. But more than that, it was a chance to create the kind of police department she had always believed in, a place where respect and justice were the foundation. As she left the meeting, her mind raced. She had a lot of work to do, but for the first time in a long time, Maya felt like everything was falling into place. She wasn't just a victim of a racist cop anymore. She was a symbol of change, of hope, and of what could be accomplished when you fight for what's right. Maya knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges, setbacks, and tough decisions. But she was ready. She had faced adversity before and come out on top. Now, as deputy chief, she would make sure that the changes she had fought for would last. Maya stood at the front of the precinct, looking out at the officers gathered before her. It was a new day for the department, and today she would address them as the new deputy chief. Her heart raced with anticipation. This moment was not only a personal victory, but a symbol of the change she had fought so hard for. Good morning, everyone, Maya began, her voice steady, but with a touch of emotion. Today is a new chapter for all of us. It's a chapter that I am proud to be a part of, but more importantly, it's one that we will write together. She paused, looking out at the faces before her, some familiar, others new. She had worked with many of them for years, and now she was their leader. But more than that, they were her allies in the fight for a department that truly upheld justice and fairness. I know what it feels like to be underestimated, to be doubted, to be unfairly treated. But I also know the power of standing up for what is right, even when the odds are against you. And I'm here to tell you that I believe in every one of you. Together, we can build a department where respect and equality are not just words. They are the foundation of everything we do. The officers in the room listened intently, some nodding in agreement. Maya could feel the weight of the responsibility she had just accepted, but she was ready. She had spent years earning the trust of her colleagues, and now she had the opportunity to shape the future of the department. She couldn't waste it. Justice isn't always easy. It requires us to be brave, to be honest, and to make the hard choices. But we can't let fear or favoritism stop us from doing what's right. We have a duty to the people we serve, and to each other, to always do our best. After her speech, Maya walked through the precinct with a sense of purpose. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There were still challenges to face, and there were many officers who hadn't yet embraced the change she was working for. But Maya was determined. She would take each step with care and resolve, building a department that upheld the values of integrity, fairness, and accountability. Maya's first task as deputy chief was to implement new training programs that would emphasize respect, equality, and community engagement. She wanted the officers to understand the importance of treating everyone with dignity, no matter their background. She also wanted to create a space where officers felt safe to report misconduct and where accountability was a priority. As the weeks went by, Maya saw changes. Officers began to speak out more, offering suggestions for improvement. There were meetings, workshops, and open discussions about how to create a better, more inclusive environment. Maya felt proud of the progress they were making, but she knew there was still work to be done. Mason's fall from grace was a reminder that change wasn't always easy. It required hard decisions and sometimes difficult consequences, but it also showed that no one was above the law. Maya had faced his cruelty, his lies, and his racism, and she had come out stronger. His downfall was not just his own. It was a victory for everyone who had ever been silenced or oppressed. Maya looked out of her office window one evening, reflecting on everything that had happened. She had fought for her career, for justice, and for the respect of her colleagues. Now she was leading a department that was moving toward something better. A department where fairness would no longer be an afterthought, but a standard. Maya knew the work would never truly be done, but that was okay. She was ready to keep fighting. For her officers, for the community, and for herself.